Cruises promise unbroken horizons, carefree laughter and ice-cold drinks. But in February 2013, life aboard the Carnival Triumph turned into something no one could have expected or prepared for. Over 4,200 passengers and crew found themselves trapped at sea, not by storms or monsters, but by a fire deep within the ship's engine room. What followed threaded routine travel with raw human endurance, a cruel twist of fate that cast ordinary people into extraordinary suffering. On February 7, 2013, the Carnival Triumph glided out of Galveston, Texas, bound for Cozumel, Mexico. Glasses clinked during embarkation, buffets homed with fresh food, and laughter rippled across balconies. By February 10th, mid-return, a fire erupted in the engine room, causing a catastrophic loss of power. The ship lost electricity, air conditioning died, refrigeration shut off, and most horrifyingly, the sewage pumps failed too. It wasn't a sudden shipwreck. There was no explosion, no mass panic, but slowly, invisibly, luxury unraveled. And for the people aboard, the glimmering fantasy of a cruise began its painful descent. With no lights, ceilings ceased to disappear. Hallways became long, dark corridors. With no air conditioning, cabins turned into steam boxes. The smell of spoiled food, sewage vapor, and human sweat combined into an oppressive, baffling haze. One passenger recalled, "I felt like I was melting. I used the towel to wrap it around my head, just trying not to pass out from the heat." Another remembered, "My kids were crying. That's what broke me. I sat them in front of a fan, whatever we could find, trying to keep them calm while I was freaking out inside too." That's the thing about breakdowns. They don't just strain systems, they test limits of love, composure, and human endurance. Here, under sweltering conditions, drenched body to drenched body, the illusion of luxury gave way to something more visceral: fear. The lack of sewage pumps meant that raw waste backed up into toilets, onto floors, and down halls. It wasn't just unsanitary, it invaded every sense and every memory. One passenger called it the smell of defeat. They said, "Every breath just brought it all in. There was no escape. I closed my eyes and prayed for a breeze." Another added, "It wasn't just physical, it was humiliation. People covered themselves, some recited crazy prayers. I'd never prayed for a shower that badly." Human dignity doesn't vanish in a crisis. It's what cracks under the strain. And in that suffocating air, dignity cracked fast. With refrigeration gone, buffet tables emptied or became hazardous. Hot, mouldering trays still emitted steam, but no one wanted what they once would have savoured. A mother recalled, "My daughter pointed to the chicken and said it smelled weird. My stomach tried to respond, but my mind shut us down. We went hungry because we were afraid of ending up sick." Another man said, "Buffet used to be the highlight. Now I stood in line and stared at food I didn't want to eat. My stomach clenched. I ended up just drinking water." It's strange to be starved for comfort when food is nearby, but starvation isn't always hunger. Sometimes it's fear and self-preservation. And yet, even amid this suffering, people reached out. Passengers handed water bottles to the frail, children shared packets of ice, strangers shielded others from sweltering sun. One patron shared, "I didn't want to touch anyone's hand, but when I ran out of water, someone just gave me theirs. We looked at each other, just nodded. It was like, we're in this together." One crew member said, "We were beyond exhaustion, but when I saw a mum comforting her teen who was sobbing and dozing off mid-hug, I couldn't just stand there. I passed extra towels, and later she hugged me." These moments mattered. In the absence of power, empathy became the only current still flowing. Fragile, precious, real. After days of heat, stench, and fear, frustration turned to anger. Bottles thrown, people shouting, tension snapped. One woman said, "I screamed at the crew officer once. I couldn't help it. I said, 'We're human beings, do something.' And then I collapsed in tears." Another recalled, There was a moment when 5 of us cornered a crew member. We just needed answers. Everyone was paranoid. Someone would yell, "We're under attack!" It was the fear sitting in our bones. A man later reflected, it wasn't rage at the staff, it was rage at the situation, at the ship, at the broken systems, at the helplessness. Anger shattered more than heat. It laid bare the raw need, not for elegance, but for agency, for information, for being seen. Hours must have stretched into days. Minds unravelled quietly. The friction between communal endurance and solitary breakdown became visible in wide, haunted eyes. One passenger remembers the mental toll. "I had flashbacks for weeks afterwards. I'd wake up sweating." Another said, "I just sat. I stared. I didn't even cry sometimes. I was too tired. Just awake in a body I'd stopped recognizing." This wasn't melodrama. It was trauma, lived in real time by travelers who'd never asked to become survivors. When the Carnival Triumph finally docked in Mobile, Alabama, days later, the passengers shuffled ashore not in triumph, but in stunned silence. One survivor simply said, "I remember stepping off, shoulder dropped, and thinking, we made it, and I still felt dirty." Another recounted, "I remember avoiding cameras. I didn't want to speak. I didn't want anyone to see me like that, like we'd been degraded." Some left with just a suitcase. Others left with a suitcase and a story that they'd carry. Dreamlike, shameful, unforgettable. Many said the cruise that was meant to be carefree transformed them, some being unable to look at vacations the same way again. The stories of these passengers didn't just ripple online, they became evidence in investigations and lawsuits. Carnival faced sharp criticism, and the Bahamas Maritime Authority and US Coast Guard conducted full reviews. The passengers were more than witnesses, they were living case studies in what happens when a system fails people. Lawsuits alleged Carnival had known about potential failures in fuel hoses and generator maintenance. Regulators demanded new protocols, whole training regimens changed, systems were redesigned, not to erase what happened, but to prevent its return. Poop Cruise. The nickname sticks because it's crude, it's viral, it's unforgettable. But that name masks something real. Human bodies, hearts and minds stuck amid melting systems and seeping failure. This story isn't about pipes or flames, it's about everyday people who, in ordinary moments, became extraordinary. It's about a mother who held her daughter through it all, a stranger who offered water, a crew member who stayed late. It's about vulnerability, solidarity, the brittle boundary between comfort and chaos.